Welcome to CLTV, a broadcast of Educator Innovator powered by the National Writing Project. This episode is being recorded on December 11, 2018, and is part of the 2018-19 Marginal Syllabus project. Marginal Syllabus is a project that convenes and sustains equity conversations in the margins of texts online using the digital annotation tool Hypothesis. I'm Joe Dillon from the Denver Writing Project and a co-founder of Marginal Syllabus along with Rainey. I'll be your host for this conversation. We've got a great panel here to discuss this month's reading, which is titled Generative Principles for Professional Learning for Equity-Oriented Urban English Teachers by Allison Scarrett, Amber Warrington, and Thea Williamson. So we're excited to invite our authors to this show, as well as a panel of readers. I'd like to start by having everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Scarrett. I'm a faculty member at UT Austin, and I am part of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction with a focus on language and literacy studies.
Hi, I'm Amber Warrington. I'm an assistant professor of English education at Boise State University and a co-director of the Boise State Writing Project.
Hi, I'm Thea Williamson. I am an assistant professor at Salisbury University, and I'm in the literacy department there.
Hi everyone, my name is Nobuko Fujita. I'm in the Office of Open Learning at the University of Windsor. I'm excited to be part of this group today. My background is in English literature and psychology, and in the Faculty of Education, I worked with different kinds of projects, mostly for online things. So I'm really excited to hear about Hypothesis and how it can be used to discuss research in the open.
Hey everyone, this is Sam. I'm Sam Reed, and I teach young people here in Philadelphia at the U School. And my tag is I teach students to read, write, and make sense of the world. I'm a high school humanities educator in Philadelphia.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Ripley Crandall. I'm an associate professor in the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions at Fairfield University. It'd be helpful if I could pronounce the university's name right. And I'm also the director of the Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield, where we have summer institutes for teachers offered as professional development that we've redesigned with young adult literacy labs that are youth-centered. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have.
Hi everyone, I'll mention briefly, I'm Rainey, Assistant Professor of Learning Technologies at the University of Colorado in Denver, and I'm one of the co-organizers and facilitators of Marginal Syllabus.
So thanks everyone for that. Thanks everyone for that round of introductions. What I'd like to do first is what we do in all of these conversations, which is give our authors the floor first to give us background about this month's reading. So if you would all please, just explain to us a little bit about the writing of this piece, the research that went into it, whatever you see fit to share, please.
Well, I can start. The first thing I'd like people to know is that this article comes from many years of research and working actually with the participants. So these participants were students of ours at the University of Texas at Austin who agreed to participate in a research project that myself, Amber, and Thea conceptualized at the time. We were interested in studying our urban teacher education program, how we were working with pre-service teachers in their development as urban teachers. And we also wanted to study their trajectory as urban teachers over time. And so we're not quite at the end point with this project, at least with this group of participants, but this was a project in which we worked with these pre-service teachers for 2 years during their teacher preparation program, and had designed the study to follow them across their first 5 years of teaching in urban schools to understand their experiences. We were interested in what influences we might find from the teacher preparation program that contributed to their stances and practices as teachers, but we also were just very interested in their trajectories. And so we're very open to understanding every and all influences and experiences that they were telling us were important on their journeys of becoming urban teachers.
I think something that is important to me in this article is showing possibilities for what professional learning does look like and can look like when the teachers are at the center and their interests are made the focus of the professional learning, and they're given agency and time to collaborate and be in dialogue with other educators. I think we all know from research and experience that that is not what professional learning and professional development looks like all the time. And so I really am honored to be part of this work to show how professional learning can look different, and the kinds of meaningful experiences that teachers can have when they're involved in those kinds of spaces around dialogue and agency.
I think another really important aspect of this article that is attention for a lot of teachers when they're thinking about the PD that they're given and then the learning that they want to experience is to really think about the kinds of PD that might be explicitly anti-equity oriented, right? And how a lot of the information or kind of top-down imposed PD that happens to teachers positions students in deficit lenses, and is really looking at the things that they don't have and what's wrong with them. And so I think a really important part of this article is thinking about how do we encourage teachers to grow and to speak back to some of that professional development that they're experiencing and living through that's really not in ideological alignment with what they believe about their students and their literacy abilities. And so really thinking about, PD as inquiry focused and as teacher focused, but also incorporating those sociopolitical dimensions into the conversation about how can teachers really think about equity and whether or not the PD that they're receiving is supporting their desires to teach towards equity and to teach towards justice in their schools.
So I think that provides a really great background to the article. Do you have anything else to add before we transition?
I'd like to add something. Brian, I believe you had this great question, and you said you'll save it for when we start recording. But I think your question related to, well, how did you come up with this concept or idea, and how did you decide to focus on this? One thing that is really important to know is that the teachers from the onset, even in their pre-service years when they would attend department meetings and things like that, always had talk in their interviews around PD. And we, as researchers, were analyzing the data, and we were paying attention to other things that we were interested in, other things that, were coming out of, the data that we were collecting from them. And there came a point when it actually stood out to us so much that we couldn't help but pay attention. And so it's not so much that we had this great idea of we really should try to look at what they're saying around PD or do a piece around PD. It was just listening to the data, and their voices were getting louder and louder around professional development until we actually started listening and noticing. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, that what we came up with in the piece, especially the principles of productive professional learning, were really based in the teachers' experiences and their voices. And so we thank them so much. And I think that's why the work is resonating with so many teachers, because really that was a line of inquiry that the teachers themselves brought to our attention, and we just simply followed their lead.
And I think one more thing, I think Amber and I talked about this in an earlier podcast about the article that I don't know is live yet. But the PD that we talked about in the actual text and kind of reporting out in the article was not even all of the things that the teachers did over the course of the year. And just to acknowledge the amount of work that teachers do outside official spaces and kind of state or district mandated PD to pursue their own learning and to do professional development on their own. Octavia did like 7 or 8 other things and attended a summer institute about hip hop and literature, and just really was a constant learner. And it's great to see that in teachers and bringing that learning back to their students. And so all of the stuff that we talked about in the text doesn't even encompass all of the learning that those teachers did over the course of, I think when the time we wrote that, they were probably in year 3 of their teaching. But just to acknowledge all of that work that teachers are constantly doing, seeking out how they might improve their practice and better serve their students.
Well, I really think that gives us a lot of background, and I appreciate those additional points about, the experiences of the teachers over the course of the year and the project. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to just kind of slow down and invite Rainey, who is a co-designer of this project along with me, to give a little background about the Marginal Syllabus project and kind of what we think we're doing here in this webinar and in this larger project. So please, Rainey.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everyone. I'm really appreciative that we're joined by our partner authors and all of our reader respondents today. I'll give a very brief background on the Marginal Syllabus project, which began in 2016 and really began in a complementary way to the focus of the study and the article that we're talking about today. And I loved hearing Allison, you just mentioned the need for listening to teachers and teachers' needs and the kinds of professional learning that they want to pursue, and then crafting projects and inquiry out of those real world teaching needs. And that's in some respects where the Marginal Syllabus project began. In 2016, Joe and I and some colleagues were having conversations around how do we support educators in reading and discussing scholarship that is explicitly related to educational equity. And we took the book group model and we expanded it a little bit. We moved it online and we moved it into the kind of online annotation space. And I want to explain that briefly. The project Marginal Syllabus very intentionally references multiple interpretations of the word marginal. So in one respect, we're reading articles that concern equity in education. These, in many cases, are articles that are not about the status quo of schooling, but as was also mentioned just in our introductory comments here, really is kind of pushing back on or kind of providing a counter narrative to typical ideas about what counts as learning and schooling, particularly in an American context. That's one interpretation of marginal that we try and embrace. We're also having conversations online using an annotation tool called Hypothesis that allows us to have conversations in the margins of texts. And I know that some of you in this call have already participated in some of those conversations where we can take an article like the one that we're discussing today, host it online in an open format, and then invite readers to read, to annotate, and to discuss through annotation, to literally be in the kind of online marginal spaces and to really encourage dialogue there. And we also, of course, are using a free, openly available tool to mediate that conversation. Again, a tool that we've mentioned called Hypothesis. And so for all of these reasons, we embrace this term and this name, the Marginal Syllabus. This year, during the 2018-19 year, in addition to being hosted by the National Writing Project, we're also partnering with the National Council of Teachers of English. And all of the texts that we're reading come from NCTE publications. We're drawing from 5 different NCTE journals, and we're working with 19 different partner authors, 3 of whom, of course, are joining us today. And it's just really lovely to have them here. And so that's really all I'll mention in regards to our project. We look forward to not only having this conversation amongst authors and readers today, but as this conversation goes live online in January of 2019, seeing conversation also grow in the margins of this article online.
Yes, and thanks, Rainey, for that synopsis of the project. And I think it's important as we transition to a conversation among readers and authors, just to name that the reading panel, the panel of readers we've invited here today, are folks who've kind of declared their interest in issues of equity and this project. And so we have a little self-selected group here, who've kind of identified their interest and expressed interest in equity. So now I'd just like to invite anyone to share what you've sort of noticed in the reading, maybe notes you've taken, questions for the author, wherever you'd like to start the conversation.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Allison, for answering my question earlier, because I was really interested how 3 individual minds came together on this particular topic, because it's very dear to my heart. And I wanted the 3 of you to know that tomorrow morning I will be doing day-long professional development, and my 3rd slide is actually a citation of your 6 generative practices, because I've been doing professional development in urban school districts, for almost over 20 years, it seems now. And often I hand out little paper dolls to everyone, and I say, you can rip off the arms, you can tear the legs off, you can stab it in the head, but don't take the professional development out on me, because I'm here to help you all improve your practices. And then I always follow up with, if anybody wants to join me in writing a book called PD from Hell, I want to write that book, because all of us on this panel, everybody who will be listening to this, have attended professional development sessions that were just plain awful, right? And so your 6 generative practices, to me, spoke volumes about what teachers have been reporting to me, administrators have been reporting to me, and especially kids who we don't often think about as part of our professional development, but they reported too about practices that do not work, and yet they keep getting created over and over and over again. I guess my first question to the 3 of you is, you did do your study on urban English teachers, and I love the term equity oriented, but I was interested in how you were defining urban, only in the sense that in the urban communities that I've moved in and out of, they vary a great deal. And I was wondering if these 3 teachers in your study, were they part of the same district, or they are part of the same metropolitan area? I know that they moved around a little bit. So how are you constructing that idea of urban?
Yeah, I think you should take that one.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. And as someone, I taught high school in Miami, and I did work in after-school programs in New York City. And so moving to Austin for graduate school, I was like, this is not urban in the same way that I have experienced urban in other places. And so I think asking what urban is a really good question. So Richard Milner kind of wrote a little bit about that a little while ago, and has a great article called What is Urban Education, and kind of lays out these 3 categories of urban schools. So urban intensive schools, which are, like the top 7 or 8 metropolitan areas in the United States that have in the metro area, upward of 4 million people living there. And then urban emergent, which are smaller cities, but that are taking on some of the, that are experiencing great growth right now, and also linguistic, economic, and racial diversity. And so the schools in those areas experience some of the same challenges that happen in these major metropolitan areas. And then also, now I'm forgetting the third, but it's like urban-like. And so schools that serve students of color, that serve multilingual students, and serve students who are designated as economically disadvantaged. And so those schools might be technically in a rural area or an area that we wouldn't consider a metro area, but are kind of dealing with some of the policy and practice issues that urban schools have. And so for our study, most of the teachers were teaching in what Milner talks about as urban emergent contexts. So smaller cities that have experienced a lot of growth, and school districts where they're serving a lot of students of color. And one of the participants was in an urban intensive school district. So a city where there were, like 15 or 20 smaller school districts, and really in a big metropolitan area.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop in just to hop on the point of urban, because this always has this contention. So I'm kind of like doing a marginal talk on urban, because that wasn't like my original thought, but it's and other people can join in or push back or add to, because often like you hear urban and you're primarily like thinking about Black and brown kids, and often like we don't call it out. And so I'm just pushing that, like, if that's what we do, if that's what we want to do, we call it out. And so I just wanted to say that. And I don't know if I can transition to like other comment. So the thing that like really struck me right away in scanning and reading the article is that like the problematic history of professional development or professional learning. And I liked how you guys framed like in this section where he says professional development and professional learning, to emphasize the former carries a problematic history of what is done to, right? And this whole construct of like PD done to teachers is like problematic. Just like if we're, like today I had a conversation with my students, because yesterday we had some communication breakdown. And what I recognized that off that day I wasn't talking with them, I was talking to them, and they didn't, and then I ended up, because I was talking to them, they pushed back, and then we started talking over each other. And so like just embracing that teaching professional development that is done to versus professional development that is done with educators. And so my question would be like, what additional research did you guys do around like the power of teacher networks? Because that's what I really like hold my hat on, because it's through the teacher networks that I think like real professional development happens. Again, when I check in with Paul Allison on teachers teaching teachers, like that's professional development with educators. Or when I attend the Fremont's Free People Conference, where all these awesome teacher activists are together, that kind of nexus of teachers supporting teachers. And so I'm curious from the authors, like what research did you do around their actual networks, or did they do any activities where they actually like map their teacher networks? Because that's something that I've been encourage other, particularly like new educators to do, like look at your teacher maps, your teacher networks, and those networks, again, they're not just like other educators, but they're even students and their community members and their community partners. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate you guys like problematizing that and putting it out front.
If I could respond to, I think it's really important to respond to your comment about urban being used as a code word, really, for Black and brown kids living in what people are no longer willing to call the inner city, right? So I want to say something in response to that. And then I think Amber and Thea are in a great place to talk about the professional networks and other learning spaces and opportunities that the other participants engaged, because they actually worked with two of these participants in an even deeper capacity around professional learning, and are doing their own writing around the professional networks, other professional networks that the teachers engaged. And so in response to the code of urban, this is not really treated in the article, except I didn't reread the article for today, but I do believe we mentioned Milner's kind of categories or descriptions of urban. But what I would like to say is that because the study is grounded in both an urban teacher preparation program and then teachers who graduate and that we prepare for, not all of them, but many of them do go to teach in schools that have the characteristics of what we've kind of named and coded as urban. We do a lot of work in the program from day one, from orientation day, deconstructing that word and actually gently insisting that our new teacher candidates start unpacking the term urban, what it makes them think of, and they start off with niceties like lots of people and diversity and lots of buildings and people from everywhere, and we keep pushing and pushing, and eventually they start saying Black kids, poor kids, crime, this, that, all of those code words. And so we tell them it's important that they put on the table all of these ideas that come to mind when they use and think about the term urban, because going into a profession or teaching a particular demographic of kids or in a particular setting really involves examining your own thinking, your own learning, and understanding where you got those ideas from, how you're carrying them into your teaching, and then thinking from a different perspective about urban, which they've often not thought about. So we talk a lot about cultural wealth. We talk about how urban was created, how it's both geography and a concept, all of these things. I won't go into a whole lot of detail about it, but I appreciate the comment. And so in relation to the article then, while the teachers would say, I teach in an urban school, I'm an urban educator, they would have done all of that work around unpacking the coding of urban, and would have learned, they spent 2 years with us, kind of reconstructing understandings of the students and communities that they actually had the privilege to work alongside. And I'll turn it over to Amber and Thea to talk more to your question about the professional learning networks of the teachers.
So the networks are really interesting. Thank you for that question. And I think we see across the three teachers in the article how different those networks can look and how they can be both formal and then informal and kind of in unofficial spaces. So with Jasmine, I think we also see her longing for more of a network than she had. She found that space in the week-long professional development workshop put on by the local National Writing Project site as a place where she possibly might find a network that she didn't have within her building. And so she partnered with that teacher consultant, the National Writing Project teacher consultant, across several semesters. So I think that shows an important tension that exists probably in more cases than just in Jasmine's, when there is a strong network outside, but yet not inside one's building, and how that can provide support, but then also cause some tensions when you want to bring ideas from one network into another, but yet that existing network within your department or your school is maybe not wanting to take up, or there's different ideas about what it means to teach and learn and work with students. And actually, we are still working with Jasmine, and she's talked more recently about seeing her network also as one with students and parents. And that her work really, the most meaningful work she does is with students and their parents and their communities. With Octavia, she had many, many networks that she was involved with, and Thea can talk about this as well, both inside her school and outside her school. And she was building in her school these networks within her professional learning community and within her department. And she was taking on these positions of leadership that were allowing her to kind of create networks more officially to mirror the networks that she was a part of outside of school. And then in Andrew's case, we see these really informal networks forming in parking lots and at happy hours and right outside of after the department meetings or the faculty meetings. So I think it's both promising and challenging to think about how teachers can develop networks outside of the formal spaces. Promising in that there can be this advocacy work that happens in the lives of teachers, right? In the spaces that they construct and create. But then also challenging when those really meaningful networks conflict with the more deficit-oriented work that Thea was talking about earlier that's happening within the official spaces. Thea, do you want to talk more about Octavia?
Sure, and I think it's important to also acknowledge that Octavia was the only one of these three teachers who stayed in the city where she received her teaching certificate, and so she had a lot of local connections to teachers, to the university, to our or not mine anymore, but the local National Writing Project site has a really vibrant teacher network and community there. And so I think that question also highlights the struggle of what do teachers do when they move, right? And people move all the time for all sorts of reasons, and having to reestablish those networks and find out who's really going to be an ally at my building and who's not interested in doing this kind of work, and how can we kind of conspire together to work against the structures that are in place or to be out in the open and kind of promote the kind of pedagogy that we're interested in. It's really, really complicated work to do, and it requires long-term relationship building and a lot of work on teachers' behalf to sustain those networks over time.
Yeah, one thing I'll add about this being strategic, and this was not only being in thinking of Andrew's case, this was not merely being strategic, although Andrew, as with all the other participants, knew they had to be strategic in order to gain traction and support and momentum for the kind of work they wanted to do. But it's not as much represented in the article, but he talked a lot about a local university that was very interested in doing research at his school, and how early on, whenever they were looking for a teacher's classroom to study, for whatever kind of study it was, he thought, if this could potentially be good for my students, then I'm going to say yes, come in, work with me, watch me teach, give me feedback. I'll try out your new program. I'll give you feedback on whether it's good or whether it's crappy. But one thing that came out of that was that he quickly became someone that was that gained capital in his school because of his openness and his willingness to do this work with other professionals. And so ultimately that allowed him to form relationships with administrators who, even though they may not have agreed or been on board with the kinds of pedagogies he was advocating for, they had respect for him professionally because they saw him as someone who was a learner and who was interested in doing what was good and right for his kids. And so so he's one that moved away from the university setting where he got his teacher preparation. But in this talking about developing networks, I think when teachers are able to be connected to some things that are larger than just themselves, that also seems to help them gain some capital and traction for the kind of work they want to do. So I think that's probably one piece for teachers to think about in terms of building networks, looking around them and seeing who are the people, that I can kind of join with, work alongside, and who would ultimately kind of help me achieve the goals that I have that are good pedagogy for students.
Naboko, did you want to say something? Rep from Canada?
Okay, so I'm gonna say I'm from Canada. I'm Canadian. I did my doctoral work at University of Toronto, so there was definitely an urban cohort there in the pre-service program, but I was not part of that cohort, and so it was. Oops, is there an alarm going on? Okay. For me, it was a bit of a wake-up call recently when I went to offer some professional development just voluntarily as part of a national Learning to Code campaign. I wanted to do it because as English teacher person, wasn't interested in coding as a child, but that was my introduction to the computers. So I said, well, I'll give back a little bit into the community and offer support where I can, if they're willing to have me. So I work with a teacher consultant for the district or board. We talked and we met informally through a non-university related thing, but we found out we were, working on similar ideas at the university, and we sort of find out more about each other through Twitter and so on. And then we got interested in this project, met with the principal, or she arranged it with the principal and the teachers. We went in and we were welcome because we call it an inner city school. It's just across the bridge from Detroit. Quite literally, we're 5 minutes. The school is like a minute away from the border crossing. And it's not a wealthy area. It's a poor area where we have a lot of immigrant students. Some are refugees. Yes, we have brown students. We have a few Black students. There's the odd, Windsor-born child there, but mostly immigrants, and it's a multicultural context. So this work really resonated with me because I guess, coming from the university, it may be seen as a top-down initiative. I didn't mean it to be. It was sort of an informal, hey, let's engage these kids, offer them something fun and a different way to learn. This work, this paper that we're reading and discussing today is really interesting to me from the different peer networks and so on that teachers have. Having researched in classrooms in Toronto, not in the urban context so much, more of a suburban context, and the different power differentials that we have at the school, within the school. If somebody's trying to try something new, if there's resistance, is the dynamic different? If the consultant is there, is the superintendent in on it, and so on. So it really spoke to me. And the principals as well. And I really like this idea of having the professional development come from the teachers. What do they want to do? What they know their students best. So I found out, these students, yes, they're engaged. You would never know these students were from an urban school, and that they were maybe hungry, and that they were maybe dealing with a diagnosed individual educational plan, mental health issues, problems at home regarding alcohol abuse or dependency, and so on. And yet, in spite of it, these kids really wowed me because they actually prepped for my coming, because they heard I was coming and they wanted me to come back. And the teachers were very open to having me come in to try to sort of extend that network that was existing at the school within the district, and maybe a bit more inclusive with people who are willing to engage in a larger community of practice. All these overlapping communities, maybe in education, at the university locally. I had a colleague from the University of Michigan join in, that I know personally quite well as a spouse, but we'd work together in Toronto, working on these kinds of projects for teachers' professional development, using technology in this case. But it could easily have been about writing. It could be about how do we connect kids to an audience that's really more authentic and not just a piece of writing that they're producing for the teacher, and how would you learn something about that, right? So really an interesting read, and I love how you unpacked the different notion of what do we mean by urban. So I look forward to hearing more from others about their perspectives on that.
This is Brian again. I had another question, and actually an observation that I think, Sam kind of initiated it for me, and the article did too. And, it's interesting, the term urban is one thing, but I also think about the term equity. I also think about the term diversity. I did my K-12 teaching in a large school district in Jefferson County, Kentucky. And most of the schools were mixed and super diverse, and it was all urban centric because that was the way the district was designed. Moving on to do my doctorate at Syracuse, their urban district was marginalized youth, read Black, read immigrant, read ELL students. And now where I am in Bridgeport, Connecticut, you go to the schools that are urban and they claim diversity. That's the mantra of the school. You go in and there's no diversity. The kids look the same and they have the same economic struggles as their next door neighbor. And so I was thinking about this breakdown of university expertise and the idea of knowledge being up here where the scholarship is really profound, but it's not trickling down into our K-12 schools in the ways that it should. And on page 122, you quoted Cochran Smith, and I thought, it was so wonderfully done. And it initiated this conversation in my own head that the very nature of urban, suburban, rural markers and divisions is total evidence of social injustice across the nation. And so if we're trying to build socially just, equity-oriented teachers, it's tricky when our zip code apartheid exists so severely within our schooling systems. And I went back to this idea of diversity, and I was thinking about Andrew's experience in terms of my definition of diversity. His school was super diverse, to kind of draw on the language of Verdovec out of Great Britain, because it really was a mix of socioeconomic backgrounds, Black, white, language speaking, which I think is true diversity. And then I started thinking about the real core of what I learned from reading in your article is that teachers, whether they're starting out and they've only had 3 years experience or they've done 25 years, they can only grow as much as their district and their administrations will allow them to grow. And what was so amazing about the first case study was that there was a National Writing Project network, and they sent them to National Writing Project kind of, orientation and way of thinking of teacher up expertise. And district-wide, they adopted that, but school-wide, it was not seen that way. And just today, I had a brand new teacher consultant in a new school. She's dynamic. What I witnessed in her room today, I was like, we should be video recording this for everyone. But she told me after I saw the lesson, she's like, I'm hated here. And I'm like, why are you hated? She goes, well, the writing experts of the district don't like the National Writing Project. And I'm like, have they ever done the National Writing Project? And they hadn't. And it's sort of like they don't understand the teachers teaching teachers practice and talking about your own professional expertise as knowledge. And because the district buys into this top down, as you call it, the freer banking model, mandate. And so I guess I'm kind of interested to hear from the writers of this article, one, about some of these divisions and tensions that occur between, kind of like administrative corporate mentality at a district level, but also the tensions felt by veteran teachers who have much more than 3 years of experience. And like, when do you as a teacher say, PD, I'm giving up. It's useless. It's never good because it's always horrific. And I actually think the answer's in your article, but I want to hear from you and your response.
I do think that happens where the administration values more of a top-down approach. I definitely agree that happens. I think what also happens is, in the case of Jasmine, the district level administration was giving authority and legitimacy to the teacher knowledge, the teacher inquiry approach that was being facilitated by the National Writing Project. And it was these, what Judith Franzak calls phantom policies, right, at the school level about what curriculum was supposed to look like. It was tradition within the English department there about what kinds of texts should be taught and how writing should be taught. And so while the administration at the district level did give, Jasmine felt this kind of legitimacy around, all right, I can do workshop, I do have professional expertise. I engaged in this collaborative community in the National Writing Project PD, but then in her department at the school level, it was all these kind of, I was going to say unspoken, but some of them were explicitly spoken traditions and kind of just ways of being, right, within that department, ways of teaching that were really hard to push against, even with that kind of district authority.
And I can chime in a little bit about that idea, right, of new or young teachers coming into a space and being excited and enthusiastic and bringing new ideas, and then also working alongside experienced educators. And Andrew, in his pre-service program, when he was a student teacher, it was one of those practices, right, those unspoken rules about English teaching that Amber, I think, just referenced, is this idea that every kid in the class has to be reading the same book, and it has to be like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Great Gatsby. And right, it's so ingrained into some English teachers that that's how we have to do things. And in his student teaching, Andrew was trying to push back on that and do something different, and caused a really big conflict in his student teaching school English department and was really ostracized by his colleagues. They did not respond well to it, and he left that experience being really cautious about bringing new ideas into an established community and having a really not good experience working with really veteran teachers who'd been there in some cases for almost 30 years, right? And so I think that's a really tough issue of, there is a lot of value in teachers teaching teachers and in valuing the expertise of experienced educators, but then also really, as I know Amber has talked about before, unpacking the ideological background behind those practices, right? I'm not gonna advocate for another teacher teaching students that, features of African-American language are wrong in their English classroom. And I think that's an established practice that we really need to speak back to. So I think there's a lot of tension around valuing expertise and experienced teachers, and also finding ways to deconstruct and expose some of these unspoken and spoken traditions in English classrooms that are really detrimental to students of color and students with linguistic diversity, right, who speak either different named languages or different varieties of English that have been historically marginalized in school spaces.
Yeah, if I'll add on really quickly to that, as Thea alluded, in speaking about Andrew's student teaching experience, during his years of in-service teaching, he reflected on, he constantly reflects on that experience and how he tried to bring about change in a way that he says, I wouldn't go about it this way again. And I think what he means by that is that he recognizes that ultimately he is part of the community in which he works, and that it does not serve students well, ultimately, to ostracize his colleagues, to make them feel that they are wrong, that they also do not care for their students or what have you. But it's really this idea of understanding where they're coming from, showing respect for what they're doing that is good for their wisdom in particular areas, without abdicating this idea of critique, which is so important. And so, one of the strategies that he began using and continues to use is looking around him to see, well, who else seems interested in the work I'm doing? He's talked about, even during student teaching, there was a new teacher from a different program that was there, and he started having these conversations with her about English teaching, and together they kind of decided to do some things that they weren't great for students, and caused a lot of friction in the English department. But at his other schools, he really, like Amber was saying, parking lots and text messages and all that, he really understood the importance of building allies and networks slowly and strategically, starting with that one teacher, that conversation, and building from there. Hey, come watch me teach. Here's this great book, you might enjoy it, in a way that started as invitations to people who showed some interest, while engaging in having relationships of respect and collegiality with colleagues who he knew he might never come around to seeing things his way, but also understanding that there was good in that teacher, in their perspective, in their beliefs. And I think that's really important for teachers to think about in their work of trying to create allies and traction around the work that they want to do. I think attracting others to your school district, your school, is really important too. Octavia she happened to be teaching in a school where there was quite a bit of teacher turnover, and she very actively recruited graduating teachers from our program to work there. And over time, they really built this strong network that it was hard to ignore, in a sense, and they were spreading these practices. So teachers do have to be political agents and strategic in terms of their networks and building relationships within their building as well, or else there will be a lot of frustration and a slowing down of the work that they may be able to do otherwise.
Yeah, can I hop in and kind of like think about next steps in terms of like, what are some things that you think you could do with student and teacher preparation programs and students in particular? And I kind of want to give a suggestion or a frame of some things, and maybe it's already things that are already in the works or things you're considering. But if we think about like the power of storytelling and like how like educators can get the stories out that like undeficitize like our work, but also like asset orientation around our kids and like getting those stories out. And like, I'm on a mission to try to like start doing some there's some awesome podcasts out there. I don't know if I've like recently got into like a podcast, I've been geeking out on podcasts. But the thing about good podcasts is like, there's a story arc in the podcasts that are like powerful. But like, where are those stories? Like, there are all these amazing story arcs about like great businessmen, changing and transforming. Like, where are those story arcs for educators? So like, I'm like pushing us, like, can we get these stories out? And teacher preparation programs could help their students get the stories out. Educators can get them out. And that can be like a big part of like professional development, because like we're going to be emboldened by the power of these stories. So I'm just sharing that. So
yeah, and I know that Joe's probably going to ask us to come around and do a round of sum up, and I want to build off of what Sam just said. So this is my sum up. Teaching is a profession, and until we start treating our teachers as professionals and experts, it's going to be deprofessionalized. On page 137 of the article, if people want to refer to it, it refers to kids who are on the fast track to go into urban schools to teach. I read that as code for several different programs of teacher preparation. They're not teacher preparation, they're deprofessionalizing the profession. And so I saw what was being done there. But the 2 points I'm taking from the entire article are the idea of appreciative stances, where your participants appreciated what was being done and grew as individuals, versus faulty PD. And, you know, I wrote in the chat room about 2 different articles that kind of influenced my professional development and thinking about why this article is so amazing. One was with Kelly Chandler Olcott in the summer program that we started at Syracuse on co-planning and co-constructing, where we learned that working with kids is just as much professional development as getting together with other faculty and talking about kids. The second one is a turnaround grant in the state of Connecticut, when just by luck, it was when Kwame Alexander's The Crossover was coming out, and he was working with me. And we did a 2-year turnaround grant, professional development with the whole school, and it worked. We turned it around, and of course, then they lost their state funding, and then they didn't have funding for the teachers as much, and they were all left. My point with that is, when you have a whole school vision that comes from the administration that empowers students and teachers up, professional development moves great distances. When you have, in other turnaround grants that I'm working with in urban schools, you have a different principal every year. You have a different ELA faculty every year. I'm a more familiar face to the kids in the schools than the teachers and administrators. There's a problem with that. And so professional development isn't occurring because the teachers have never been treated like professionals in those particular such situations. So my 2 points are, we should look more at appreciative stances of teachers and what they like as professional development, and we should allow them more opportunities to name what they see as faulty. Yep.
So Brian, I thank you for kind of anticipating that we're nearing the end of this hour. And what I'd like to do is just to ask the readers, because I really do feel like I appreciate how much the authors' voices have come through. And I really hope that it will stimulate the reading that we can do socially online. So I think ending with a few reader notes about things that were noteworthy to them, ideas those generated for them, just quick reader notes would be a great way to wrap. So I hope that's okay, and we'll ask for a quick whip around with that.
I did mine, so I'm muting.
So is that me? Yeah, I think I kind of said my piece as well, and just try, like, whatever ways. I appreciate this article, and I think the fact that we're going to get on line and comment and feed off of it. If we can get the stories of teachers, I think part of like professionalizing teachers is getting the story out. And so, whatever ways we can do to elevate our stories. And partly is like doing it in the academic setting, but then it's also like in the public and popular sphere as well. So thank you. I think this could be used for that. And so, like, again, I want to do a podcast where I'm elevating the assets and the amazing stuff that our students are doing and the professional work that educators are doing. And I think this article could be definitely used for that, but then I have to like take the time to like craft and develop a cool podcast. So maybe I'll look for you guys for some of that support on that.
Nobuko, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do. How do I build on that? Well, for me, I'm a newbie to talking informally with the authors of an article, people that I haven't met in person, meeting all of you through Twitter, or, Remy, I heard about you through Bodong, who went to a conference, and myself just being a little wary about putting myself out there on annotating and hypothesis with people I don't know yet. You don't know who I am. You don't know if I'm, I don't know, somehow malicious. No, I'm supportive of the work that you do. I mean, my research at the University of Toronto, my thesis was about teachers' professional development in online courses, so formal. But then I worked on related projects where I work in more informal peer networks with teachers, teacher candidates, principles, and then just the kind of work I do now on a voluntary basis, no research associated with it, just wanting to get out there and give back a little bit. So what really stood out for me, and if I were brave enough to annotate on hypothesis, which I will later, I think I was really drawn to this idea of Andrew's principles of 2 and 3 on page 137 of the article, and how the teachers, the excited, we call them teacher candidates, sometimes you call them student teachers, they come out of a B.Ed program that taught them all kinds of cool and innovative ways to teach writing, for example, in English or language arts and so on. And then they go out and they are in a different community of practice where they are a newcomer to the established community of practice of teachers in that district or their school or what have you. And it's really hard to infuse something new because you're seen as the new kid, and why would they listen to you? You don't know anything. All that stuff you learned is theoretical. And then they get into a PD where they're taught to how to prepare their students to write for, in our case, a provincial exam, right? It's called the EQAO, and it's really about preparing students to write a paragraph. And why does a paragraph have to have 6 sentences? You know, that really disturbs me, having taught kids how to write, or I don't know, graduate students how to write, or editing or collaborating with co-authors. Why does a paragraph have to have 6 sentences? Could it have 3? Could it have more? That's the kind of PD that they were delivering. A local teacher actually, but at a provincial level, and I thought that's kind of disturbing, right? So so on this project, the participants or the Andrew, Jasmine, Octavia, they've been in the field for 3 years, and now they're getting to a point where they can see themselves as agents of change or the resistances that they're going to encounter. And I think it's really an important conversation then for us as educators or researchers or people who support this kind of conversation to raise that awareness and indeed make this sort of the muse, or to elevate, right? It from being an article that only academics read or people who are interested in this topic read, but rather it's out in the open. Like, do we really want to inhibit teachers from doing their professional job and to develop their identity as professionals? I don't want that. I want them to do whatever means that it takes, and there's support out there, right?
Naboku, that brought up a good point. Like, this is my last statement. I just asked if I could ask it. Next steps, right? So much of what I think I do as a National Writing Project Director is what I call intellectual Robin Hood, and it's stealing from the haves to give to the have-nots. And any of us who are in institutes of higher education are extremely privileged. It's not the real world. It's not the world of our K-12 teachers. And this article is powerful. It's wonderful. It's much needed. I'm wondering, I'm thinking about my summer institute and getting this in the hands of my teachers, and it is academic, and they don't have the time, and they don't read scholarship in the way that we do at the university. And I'm wondering if there's an article or a practitioner piece that might be written so that directors like me can go into superintendents of schools and say, look at this research. Your teachers are frustrated by the professional development you're giving. We have to figure out a way to work together between K-12 schooling institutions and institutes of higher ed to provide best practices. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about next steps of where you're going with your knowledge that you provided in this article.
Well, I'll respond and thank you for both of those ideas. I think it provides some really important food for thought for us about getting the word out to administrators, department chairs, people in positions who really are the ones that our participants wanted to listen to them and who needed to listen to them and be on board to get this to work. I think the teachers themselves sharing their stories is really important. I know that in Andrew's case, I've been encouraging him, and he's very interested in writing for other teachers about the work he's doing and what it takes to do the kind of work that he's doing. He's serving as a mentor of sorts to other teachers who want to do that work. And I think this idea of supporting teachers in learning how they can do this work themselves is really important, and could be another direction that we go in terms of we've presented with these teachers at NCTE and had wonderful feedback from the audience, great interactions, but I think all of us are kind of pushing them, like, you're ready to be the one going out there talking with your colleagues and sharing your stories, and we really want to go in that direction with this project. Because ultimately, teachers want to talk with other teachers. As researchers, we don't have to be the ones who bring the knowledge. We're generating it from working with them, so why not have teachers talking with other teachers, right? They're the ones doing the work.
Thank you, Allison, for that. I just really want to thank you, and of course, co-authors Amber and Thea, for sharing this important scholarship with us today, and also, of course, for Naboku and Brian and Reed for joining as our reader respondents. And let me just kind of mention as I wrap up our conversation this afternoon that this last hour conversation has been really quite representative of many marginal syllabus conversations, whether they are webinars or whether they occur digitally through web annotation in the margins of a text. We're playing around with language. We're testing out ideas. We're trying to figure out how to be explicit and how to unpack ideas. Allison, at one point you talked about the idea of reconstructing understanding of certain ideas, and I think that's a really lovely kind of core theme. How do we begin to reconstruct understandings of pedagogy, of these generative principles for equity-oriented professional learning? How do we begin to do that as a community of learners? And how do we also, as this end of our conversation has really suggested, how do we connect research and practice in really symbiotic and organic and emergent ways? We know that research practice connections move back and forth in a variety of complementary ways. And we do have many K-12 educators who read the scholarship that Marginal Syllabus has hosted over the last 3 years now. We do have many K-12 educators who, in addition to reading the scholarship, do share their thoughts through public open annotation. And so I just want to kind of close by saying that the forthcoming annotation conversation, I hope, will begin to do some of the things that we've already started to do in our conversation today. That is, that when we have the ability to openly comment and annotate on an article like the one written by Allison, Amber, and Thea, that we begin to make our terms explicit, that we begin to question our terminology and our language and our definitions of certain ideas, that we begin to construct and reconstruct some of that understanding about pedagogy and professional learning, and that we ultimately begin to strengthen those practice research practice connections. And so my sincere thanks to all of you for engaging in this conversation, and I hope that the same kinds of discourse moves from this space into our online conversation starting in January. So again, thank you to everyone.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Rainey and thank everyone for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in the margins. And again, thanks for today's conversation.